Hey guys, tonight we drift quietly into a world of muddy canals, clinking wooden shoes, and a courtyard garden where a single flower might be worth more than your entire savings account and your neighbour's goat. Yes, we're in 17th century Holland, where tulips don't just bloom, they ruin lives. And if you're thinking, oh, it's just a flower story, how bad can it be, let's be honest? You probably won't survive this. There are no safety rails. You're about to witness one of the most confusing, overhyped, and quietly tragic financial collapses in history, caused by plants. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now let's dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The morning fog hasn't lifted yet, and you're already ankle deep in the smell of wet soil and hopeful failure. You trudge through a quiet alley in Harlem, past rows of gabled houses with crooked chimneys and suspiciously shiny windows. There's a man standing in a courtyard, staring at a flower like it just whispered the meaning of life to him. It's a tulip. One bloom, orange at the base, white at the tips, with crimson streaks that look painted on by an indecisive god. It's beautiful, but more importantly, it's expensive. Mainstream fact. In the 1630s, the Dutch Republic experienced what is now widely known as tulip mania, a period during which tulip bulbs were bought and sold for astonishing sums, some reportedly higher than the price of an Amsterdam townhouse. You watch as the man gently wraps the bloom with a scarf, like it's a newborn kitten. He leans in and whispers its name, Semper Augustus. That's not a flower, it's an investment portfolio. Across the city, taverns are buzzing with numbers. A single bulb might be worth 200 guilders, maybe 2,000, maybe 3,000 if it's got stripes and nobody blinks too hard. For context, a skilled craftsman might earn 300 guilders a year. Fringe tidbit, there were reports, possibly exaggerated, of people trading 12 acres of land, a full cart of beer, 4 oxen, and a painting by Rembrandt's cousin maybe for 1 tulip bulb. A bulb which, at this point, might still be in the ground. You pass by a bakery where the tulip charts are posted right next to the bread prices. The baker eyes you suspiciously, probably wondering if you're in the market for a loaf or a floral futures contract. Historians still argue whether tulip mania was truly a bubble in the modern economic sense. Some suggest the most outrageous stories were exaggerated by moralizing pamphlets or bitter satirists. Others believe it was one of history's first mass-market delusions, tulips as luxury, tulips as status, tulips as currency. You sit on a bench and stare at the canals, which look like long mirrors slicing the town in pieces. It's quiet, but you know, just behind those narrow brick walls, deals are being whispered, inked, promised. Bulbs changing hands, not just for coin, but for reputation. You're not just buying a flower. You're buying a name. You're buying into a story. And you already feel the twist coming, don't you? That slight shiver beneath the soil. That first whisper of cold wind before the frost. Yeah, but for now, the flower still stands. And the man in the courtyard, he's smiling like he owns the world. Because maybe, just for this moment, he does. You follow the scent of roasted herring and candle wax through a side alley until the canal opens up again, and there it is, a modest wooden door with iron hinges, swinging open just enough to let out a trail of muddy boots and very loud whispers. Inside, They're talking about the newest arrival to Europe's social scene, the tulip. Not just any tulip, though. This is the 1600s, and the flower is still a foreigner. Mainstream fact tulips were not native to the Netherlands. They were originally cultivated in the Ottoman Empire, what's now Turkey, where they symbolised paradise, perfection, and a certain level of elite garden snobbery. The name tulip may even come from the Persian word dulband, meaning turban, because of the flower's rounded, folded shape. You slip inside the room and sit near the back. A man is unrolling a faded map with dramatic flair, stabbing his finger at the eastern end of it. Constantinople, he announces, as if that explains everything, which, to be fair, it kind of does. It started with diplomats, always does. One Dutch ambassador to the Ottomans came home with tulip bulbs packed more carefully than his clothing. Then university botanists got interested, then private collectors, and then, of course, everyone else. Fringe tidbit. There are rumours slippery, unconfirmed, that one of the first tulips in Europe was actually stolen from an imperial garden, or smuggled in a boot, or hidden in a sack of dates. No one really agrees. Historians still argue whether the earliest shipments were authorised, or if tulip fever began with botanical theft. You peer over the shoulder of a thin merchant with ink-stained hands. He's sketching tulips with increasingly impossible names. Viceroy, Admiral Leafkins, Generalissimo. These are not names for flowers. These are names for horse lords. But that was the thing, the more exotic the name, the higher the price. You step out into the morning light and walk past the garden of a retired naval officer. His gate is locked, inside a single tulip, flanked by two enormous mirrors so that no matter which angle you look from, you see three. It's not about the plant anymore. It's about the performance. You begin noticing it everywhere now. Tulips in windows, tulips on embroidered handkerchiefs, tulips stitched into the hems of skirts, tulip graffiti, scratched into church benches and behind the alehouse. It's blooming, and it won't stop. You pass a market stall where someone's selling miniature paintings of tulips portraits. Really, because not everyone can afford the real thing, but they can still own the image. You spot one titled Broken Flame. It's a striped bloom, split into jagged streaks of colour that make it look like it's burning. Fringe tidbit broken tulips, the ones with those dramatic, streaked patterns, weren't bred on purpose. They were infected with a virus, later named the tulip breaking virus, which altered the pigmentation. At the time, no one knew. They just called them rare and valuable, and wildly beautiful. You turn the corner and there's a boy pushing a cart of manure past a house that just sold a bulb for more than his family's annual income. He doesn't look bitter, just amused. Because even then, some people knew it didn't make sense. A flower's still just a flower. But in this particular decade, in this peculiar pocket of the world, it was also a symbol, a gamble, and occasionally a disaster waiting to unfold. And right now, it's still rising. The colours are brighter, the names are fancier, and the promises are starting to sound like dreams in Debt's clothing. But we're not there yet. Not quite. For now, the petals are still perfect, and the world is pretending not to count how many are in bloom. You wander out of the alley and into a quiet courtyard just as the early sun slices across the cobblestones. There's a gardener on his knees, sleeves rolled up, hands deep in dirt. He's humming badly but softly, like he's trying to keep the tulip from overhearing. In front of him, rising from the dark soil, is a bloom unlike anything you've ever seen. It glows. Not in a magical way, just in a way that makes your eyes ache slightly from looking too long. Deep crimson slashed with white, a swirl of colours as if a candy cane and a blood orange had a heated argument. The petals curl slightly at the edges like they're shy. This is what people mean when they say tulip bit the moonlight. Mainstream fact. The first broken tulips, those streaked with variegated patterns, were considered marvels of nature. People had seen solid colours before, but these looked like something from a painting or a fever dream. Their appearance ignited intense demand, and their rarity made them the most coveted of all. You crouch beside the gardener. He gives you a sideways glance, then gently brushes the soil around the base of the bloom. "She's almost ready," he says. You nod. Of course she is. Her name is Gouda's Flame, probably, or Venus's Whimsy, or Super Deluxe Mystery Stripe Plus Ultra. Something dignified and silly at once. And she's worth well. More than the gardener's house. Probably more than the street. Fringe tidbit. One of the most infamous bulbs, Semper Augustus, was sold and resold at astronomical prices, sometimes over 5,000 guilders. At the time, that could buy a furnished home in central Amsterdam, plus servants, and a horse, maybe 2 horses. And here's the thing. The gardener doesn't own the flower. He's tending it. For someone else. Someone wealthy enough to commission the care of a bulb they'll never plant themselves. Someone who comes once a month to inspect it with a monocle and an air of deep misunderstanding. You ask him if he's ever sold one. He shakes his head. Too poor to plant my own, too smart to try. He taps the side of his nose and goes back to humming. You stand and wander to the next garden. There, you see rows of simpler blooms, reds, yellows, whites, still beautiful, still dignified. But no one writes songs about those. No one names their daughter after a plain yellow tulip. Historians still argue whether the obsession was about beauty, rarity, or social panic. Was this just conspicuous consumption in botanical form, or did tulips fill some strange void in a culture looking for something new to covet? You look back at Moonbite, or whatever this bloom is called. It sways gently in the breeze, completely unaware that it's now an asset class. Fringe tidbit. Some collectors began commissioning tulip paintings to show off their prized bulbs year-round. These were sometimes displayed like family portraits, except instead of a stern grandfather, it was Admiral Van Enkhuizen, 3rd bulb from the left. You leave the courtyard and pass a woman selling ribbons embroidered with tulip designs. She doesn't have any real ones, but she has the next best thing, a bit of the aura, for a few coins. She whispers, "They say a new one bloomed in Delft yesterday. Purple with gold teeth." You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. "I didn't say it made sense. I said it sold." And that's the mood right now. Doesn't matter if it's true. Doesn't matter if it's possible. If someone says a tulip looks like moonlight sliced by lightning, well, someone else is ready to pay for the description alone. Because the flower isn't the product anymore. The feeling is. You keep walking. The air smells like wet earth and ambition. And everywhere you look, petals are opening like mouths that don't know when to stop whispering. You drift down a narrow canal path where the buildings lean inward like gossiping relatives. Just past a cheese shop, a tavern door swings open, and out stumbles a man with a purple velvet scarf and a deeply questionable moustache. He doesn't spill his drink, but he does shout something about a striped tulip named after a general that just made him a man of stature. Inside, it's warm and thick with candle smoke, and the conversation hums like a beehive made of pride and botany. Everyone's comparing tulip names, bulb lineages, and who bought what from whom for how much. It's not a bar anymore, it's a floral bragging forum. Mainstream fact: by the early 1630s, tulips in the Netherlands had evolved far beyond their role as ornamental plants. They became status symbols, luxury items that denoted wealth, taste, and a kind of insider sophistication. Collectors competed to outbid one another, often more for the name and rarity than the flower itself. You sit down at the corner table, where a man in a doublet 2 sizes too small is lecturing 3 friends about the Admiral van der Eyck, a tulip with a subtle streak that only reveals itself after the 3rd day of bloom, if spoken to nicely. His friends nod as if this makes perfect sense. Across the room, a merchant is scribbling furiously on a napkin. He's calculating how many barrels of salted herring he needs to sell in order to buy one General Van Horn bulb. He's on barrel 18, and he's smiling. Fringe tidbit: many of the most coveted tulip names, admirals, generals, viceroys, were completely made up. There was no governing body. Growers could name bulbs anything they liked, and the grander the title, the higher the price. One particularly bold tulip was reportedly named Lord of all Nations. Subtle. Back outside, the streets echo with quiet posturing. Wealthy gentlemen strut along the cobbles with tulip petals tucked into their lapels. Ladies lean over balconies comparing bloom patterns like they're trading royal secrets. One woman whispers, "Ours bloomed with 5 stripes this year." The other raises an eyebrow. "Ours had 6, and a curl." You don't know what that means, but apparently they do. Historians still argue whether tulip mania was mostly an upper-class phenomenon or a broader social craze. Some evidence points to wealthy merchants and landowners dominating the trade. Others insist the obsession reached bakers, blacksmiths, and barmaids, anyone with a little savings and a dream of petal-shaped profit. You walk into a tailor's shop, where a young man is embroidering tulip motifs onto the cuffs of a customer's coat. He tells you each design is based on a real bulb. Authentic, he says. None of that made-up petal fluff. You nod solemnly. Because we're pretending there's tulip integrity now. Fringe tidbit one Harlem broadsheet suggested that tulips could reveal a man's true social frequency, a term no one ever explained. People quoted it anyway. You wander to a bridge, where a pair of men are comparing tulip transactions the way people compare fishing stories. "I once sold a lac van Rijn for a goat, a violin, and a promised song," one says. "And did he sing it?" the other asks. "No, the first sighs. He moved to Rotterdam." You stand quietly, looking at the water. There's something beautiful here, yes, even in the madness. Not just the flowers, but the way people crave beauty so much they'll measure themselves by it. You're not sure when the bragging turned to betting, but you're certain it did. And now the petals aren't just delicate, they're competitive. The flowers don't care, but the people... They're about to make tulips the most ambitious plant in Europe. You pass under a crooked wooden sign etched with the words "Bloemen en boterhammen," flowers and sandwiches, and step into a tavern that smells like wet parchment, pickled eggs, and a little bit of desperation. It's quieter than most. The air is thick with thought. At a table near the back, 3 men huddle over a single parchment sheet. There's no flower in sight, just a drawing. A tulip sketched in rich, dark ink, its petals striped like lightning bolts. At the bottom, a name, the sworn viceroy, and a price 2,500 guilders. The catch: the bulb doesn't exist yet. Mainstream fact. As tulip mania grew, people began trading not the flowers themselves, nor even the bulbs, but promises. These futures contracts guaranteed delivery of specific bulbs at a later date, often months away. The bulbs were still underground or hadn't even bloomed yet, but their projected beauty and therefore value was already being bought and sold. You slide onto a bench and watch them haggle. One man, with greasy curls and half a tooth, insists the price will double once the bloom is seen. Another, stroking his chin like it owes him rent money, warns that too many viceroy drawings are circulating. What if they all look the same, he mutters. You resist the urge to ask what happens if none of them bloom at all. But of course, that's the risk. Fringe tidbit. Some contracts were written so vaguely that no one really knew what they'd bought, just a bulb of the admired sort, or a streaked bloom of good esteem. It was like ordering a sandwich and getting a poem instead. You step outside again and cross the canal to the warehouse district. The real money isn't in gardens anymore, it's in ledgers, quills, and whispers behind doors that don't quite close. A merchant unfolds a long scroll, tapping at entries. Viceroy, 10 shares. General's flame, 3 pending. Admiral's mistake, marked lost. You blink. Admiral's what? He shrugs. It turned out to be yellow, plain yellow. You wince. Someone lost a house on that. Historians still argue how common these speculative contracts were. Were they widespread or just limited to a few overconfident tulip groupies? Some records suggest the madness stayed mostly in urban centres. Others imply it bled into farming communities, carpenters' workshops, and even a few suspiciously well-dressed monasteries. You pass a young couple with dirt under their nails, standing by a produce cart. They're not selling vegetables today. They're selling fractions of a future tulip. 10 guilders gets you a quarter claim on a yet-to-sprout sunfire queen. They smile nervously. You almost wish them luck. Fringe tidbit. There were tulip lotteries in some towns, low-entry games of chance where the winner got a bulb or the promise of one. Losers got drawings, or scented oil, or in one documented case, nothing at all. As night creeps in, the candle-lit windows flicker like a warning. You pass a lawyer's house with a stack of bulb contracts on the stoop so high. It leans. He's inside, trying to explain to a customer that the contract says one streaked bloom, not the streaked bloom. Subtle difference. Expensive mistake. The lines are starting to blur. Not just between buyers and sellers, but between real flowers and imagined ones. Between what's blooming in the ground and what's blooming in the margins of a contract in ink and hope. You stop by a shop selling wooden tulips, perfect little replicas with names carved into the stems. They'll never bloom, but they'll never disappoint either. And for the first time, you wonder, would that be safer? Because this world of paper promises and botanical ambition, it's growing faster than anything that's actually in the soil. And the roots, you don't see those. Not yet. But they're twitching. You wake to the sound of rain tapping on the shutters and someone, somewhere, yelling about onions. You pull on your coat and shuffle outside, drawn by the unmistakable buzz of a market morning, except this one doesn't smell like fish or turnips. It smells like wet parchment, bruised pride, and the faint perfume of expensive dirt. Because today, you're visiting the flower auction in Alkmaar. And it's not being held in a fancy hall or merchant's courtyard, it's happening in the back room of a tavern, next to the firewood pile and under a painting of a goat that looks legally suspicious. Mainstream fact tulip auctions during the height of tulip mania were often informal and conducted in taverns or other public meeting places. Bulbs were rarely present instead. Transactions were based on written descriptions, drawings, and, occasionally, unhinged levels of optimism. You step into the smoky warmth and immediately regret it. It's packed. Men with feathered hats and rumpled collars lean over benches, arguing in numbers. A chalkboard lists names like Admiral of Admirals, Curled Viceroy, Scarlet of Fortune. Next to each, price is written and crossed out and rewritten again. A man announces that one Gouda flame bulb is just sold for 2,400 guilders, 2 barrels of beer and an accordion. You nod like this is a normal Tuesday. Fringe tidbit. At the height of the craze, there were even bulb option contracts, where people could pay a small fee for the right to buy a bulb at a future price, kind of like putting a down payment on a dream made of plant flesh. The auctioneer slaps his palm on the table. Next, lot 31. 1 bulb of the Purple Emperor's second blush, grown in the fine soils of Nkuzen strong root. Honest curve. You are now witnessing someone selling a vibe. The buyer, an older man with an alarming amount of velvet, bids 2,000 guilders. The tavern erupts. Someone near the fireplace falls over laughing. A younger merchant raises the bid with a wink and the promise of 2 swans and a cellar full of cheese. You blink. Did he mean actual swans? No one checks. No one can check. Because here, everything is happening in the future tense. The bulbs still underground, sometimes not even dug up yet. The flowers not blooming for weeks, but the deals are moving fast, each bid more breathless than the last. Historians still argue whether these auctions were driven by genuine belief in tulip value, or simply social momentum, the rush of shared delusion, a contagious need to not be left out. But one thing is clear, the bulbs aren't the point anymore. They're placeholders for wealth, for ambition, for a kind of elegance that no one really understands but everyone desperately wants to be seen believing in. Fringe tidbit. In at least one auction, a buyer paid the price of a large house for a bulb that turned out to be a common onion. The seller vanished. The tavern rebranded itself as the Honest Tulip. Irony levels 9 out of 10. You sip bad wine and watch as the chalkboard fills and empties. Names shift. Prices dance. A man cheers at a sale and immediately tries to resell what he just bought to someone next to him for more. It works. Someone scribbles the deal on a napkin. It counts. And yet, no one's holding a bulb. No one's seen a flower. But the room is buzzing like a beehive full of flowerless faith. You step out as the rain softens, back into the mud and fog and the faint scent of real soil. The world feels quieter out here. Slower, like it still belongs to something solid. But back in the tavern, they're trading pieces of spring that hasn't come yet. And they're acting like it's already summer. The sky over Harlem has the colour of cold pewter, and you're standing ankle deep in slush beside a baker who just sold his family's bread oven. Not for money, for a tulip bulb. Or rather, a promise of a tulip bulb. One with a name that sounds more like a bedtime story than a flower the eternal fire of Holland. He pats the contract like it's a newborn. It'll triple by spring, he says, with the same nervous energy of someone who's just bet their socks on a horse with only 3 legs, but a really good attitude. Mainstream fact. During the height of tulip speculation, many ordinary citizens, bakers, brewers, barbers began selling or bartering valuable assets, furniture, tools, even land in exchange for bulbs they believed would soon make them rich. It became, for many, less about flowers and more about escape velocity. You walk with him through the frozen street as he lists all the things he'll buy when the flower blooms a bigger house. Maybe a second horse, a tiled stove like the notary has, and a goose, a personal goose. You nod. You don't have the heart to say what you're thinking, because you've seen too many people holding too many pieces of paper with the same hopeful grin, and not a single one of them has actually smelled a tulip. Fringe tidbit. Some men took to carrying sketches of their future tulips tucked in their coats, like portraits of lovers they hadn't met yet. If someone asked to see it, they'd present the drawing with a sigh and say things like, "She's going to be magnificent." The baker invites you in for tea, which he now brews over a campfire stove in the corner, beside the empty stone oven. He shows you the parchment-aged, signed, smudged. It promises a bulb that shall bear streaks of crimson not unlike a comet's tail. You try not to laugh. You succeed. Barely. Historians still argue whether most of these ordinary folks were driven by greed or desperation. Was this economic irrationality, or simply economic hope, when everything else felt impossible? Tulips were a bloom-shaped, maybe. The baker's wife brings in a bundle of laundry and glances at the contract. Her expression is unreadable. She doesn't say anything. She just sets the tea down and walks out. You finish your cup and thank him. Outside, you pass a blacksmith hammering something with more aggression than usual. He stops long enough to say he's ordered a rare double-frilled sunburst admiral and paid for it with 4 pigs and his neighbour's wheelbarrow. When asked what he'll do with it, he shrugs. Might trade it for 2 horses or a painting. Fringe tidbit. One woman reportedly traded a family Bible, a pair of lace gloves, and a sapphire hair comb for half a bulb share. She kept the receipt folded in a wooden box lined with lavender. When the market collapsed, she turned the box into a sewing kit. You walk along the canal now, where the ice has started to crack around the edges. Reflections shimmer. Above you, the gables of expensive houses peak like smug eyebrows, silently watching the parade of flower chasers march through slush. And you wonder, is this hope? Is this madness? Is there even a difference anymore? At the market square, a man is shouting tulip names like they're spells. Viceroy Admiral Leafkins, the morning fire of Zaan people rush forward, waving coins, promises, bacon. Someone trades a goat. Another trades the promise of a goat. And no one blinks. Because the flower they haven't seen yet, it's going to change everything. You're standing under the eaves of a fishmonger's stall, rain dripping down the back of your collar, watching a man argue over how many loaves of bread a tulip bulb is worth. Not a tulip. Not even a blooming bulb. Just a lumpy, papery brown nub pulled from a sack like someone tried to smuggle disappointment. 10 loaves and a smoked eel, he insists. The seller laughs. This one it's worth a canal boat, my friend. The fishmonger throws up his hands and stomps away, muttering something about flower people needing a good splash in the harbour. You, of course, stay to see what happens next. Because this bulb is now the size of a small myth. Mainstream fact during tulip mania, the bartering system went fully haywire. Some tulip bulbs, especially rare striped varieties, were traded for extravagant goods land, livestock, furniture, entire livelihoods. A well-documented example included an offer of 12 fat sheep, a silver goblet, a cartload of grain, and 2 full kegs of wine for a single tulip bulb. You wander deeper into the square where a man is making trades from the back of a donkey cart. He has no tulips, only drawings. He's already swapped 1 sketch of Admiral van der Eyck for a month of lodging, a sack of barley, and 3 pairs of shoes. The shoes are mismatched. No one cares. Fringe tidbit: some tulip traders started accepting bulb bundles, random assortments of unknown bulbs, packaged like mystery loot boxes. You'd open them in spring, and sometimes you'd get treasure, other times yellow, just plain yellow. The shame was real. You pass by a cloth merchant whose tent flap is open just enough to hear him whispering about a deal gone bad. He traded a high-backed chair, a gold ring, and a full chest of linen for what turned out to be a mislabeled daffodil. The label read, "Star of Harlem." It bloomed, disappointingly. He burned the label, kept the flower, buried the contract. Historians still argue whether these trades were formalized through any system of appraisal, or if the whole thing was just mutual optimism layered on top of communal hysteria. Some records show contracts, others suggest handshakes, and ale sealed most deals. You stop by a window where a maid is sketching a tulip in charcoal on a scrap of wood. It's not for sale. It's a copy of a flower her employer owns but won't let her near, so she draws it from memory. "It's called Queen's Echo," she whispers. "Supposed to have gold specks. I only saw it once, when she brought it home in a silk pouch." You ask if she'll trade the sketch. She stares, then says, "Depends. What do you have?" You hand her a cinnamon stick and a flat piece of chalk. She shrugs. Fair. Fringe tidbit: some people collected only the names of tulips. They had no bulbs, no drawings. Just long, meticulously copied lists of the most poetic or outrageous tulip names. These name books were traded like treasure. One man was rumoured to sleep with his list under his pillow. You pass a bakery that's closed early. A sign hangs crookedly. Gone to buy a tulip. The door's locked, but the smell of burnt crust still hangs in the air like a reminder flour can't beat fantasy. At a nearby bridge, a boy tosses small stones into the canal, counting them aloud. 10 stones for the Viceroy, he says. 15 for the Admiral. 32 for the Painted Lady of Utrecht. You don't ask where he got the numbers. You already know they don't matter, because none of this is about value. It's about belief, about what people are willing to give up for the chance that a bulb will bloom just right. You walk home past houses with pawned curtains and sold-off porches, people making tea over smaller fires, chickens gone, dogs confused. The luxuries now live underground, in beds of soil and paper promises. And tomorrow, someone will trade an entire dining set for the royal blush of Enkhuizen. Because if it blooms like the drawing says, there'll be a king. You duck into a cramped studio, the kind that always smells faintly of turpentine, damp linen, and quiet disappointment. The ceiling leaks in 3 places. A cracked window frames a view of the canal that looks beautiful if you squint just right and don't think too hard about the smell. And there he is. A painter. Bent over a stretched canvas, brush in hand, painting a tulip he's never seen. Mainstream fact. Many Dutch painters of the era were commissioned to create tulip portraits, detailed botanical illustrations meant to preserve and advertise rare bulbs. But some artists, unable to afford the bulbs themselves, painted from memory, rumour, or imagination, hoping to one day earn enough for a real flower. He's covered in flecks of paint and last night's sleep. His palette is all reds, whites, ochres, You notice how careful he is with the stripes, each curve measured like it might be judged in court. The tulip he's painting, it's called the Burning Admiral. He's never seen one, only read about it. Fringe tidbit artists in Amsterdam were sometimes paid in bulb shares rather than coin. One such painter reportedly completed 12 tulip portraits and received, instead of money, a box of soil and a handshake. You ask him if he wants to see a real one. He waves a hand dismissively. What's the point? By the time I could afford a bulb, it'll already be sold to someone's cousin in Leiden and bloomed itself into myth. You ask if he's ever tried painting anything else. You shrug. Nobody commissions potatoes. There's a bitterness there, but not deep. It sits on the surface like a cracked glaze. You walk past his other works, rows of ghost tulips, names scrawled in the margins, Semper Augustus, Sun's Fingerprint, Moonlit Van Tromp, all flowers he's painted from hearsay and envy. He pauses, brush mid-air. Want to hear something funny? You nod. I painted one that sold for 50 guilders. The man who bought it came back a week later and asked for another, because the bulb he traded for turned out to be garlic. You snort. Grins, then returns to his work. Historians still debate how painters navigated the tulip boom. Some benefited handsomely, producing lavish illustrations for catalogues and contracts. Others were frozen out, unable to participate in a world where pigment couldn't match petal speculation. You glance back at the canvas. The tulip he's painting doesn't quite look real. It looks better than real. Like it bloomed once in a dream, was described in a fever, and recreated in a moment of longing. Fringe tidbit. A few painters began inventing tulips entirely. One known as the cartographer of colour created a map of a fictional garden filled with flowers so rare, no one dared question their value. One of them, the Widow's Breath, sold as a sketch for 600 guilders. You leave the studio as dusk slips over the rooftops. Lanterns flicker in the windows. Somewhere, someone is reading a bulb contract by candlelight, their eyes twitching between words like admired and speculative. And the painter, he's still inside, still making something beautiful, still chasing a flower he may never touch. Because in this moment, it's not about money. It's not even about fame. It's about capturing the thing everyone else is selling, but no one has time to see. A single bloom. Still. Unmoving. Impossible. And somehow, worth more than gold. The streets smell like beer foam and wet boots. And somewhere nearby, someone is burning a bad contract. You're standing in the middle of a cramped dining hall, packed shoulders to shoulder with wool coats, steamy windows, and the rising scent of doubt. A candle gutters in its holder. A tulip bulb sits on a plate where a roast should be. No one's laughing anymore. It smells like dirt and anxiety. Mainstream fact. As tulip speculation reached its fever pitch in early 1637, even those fully invested began to feel the strain. Prices became wildly erratic. Bulbs were traded multiple times a day without anyone stopping to question what would happen when spring came and real flowers replaced fantasies. Someone opens a window, and a gust of cold wind knocks a paper contract off the wall. It lands in a puddle of spilled ale and slowly melts. A man near the fireplace is pacing in tight circles, muttering about how it was worth 3 times that just last week. His friend nods, eyes fixed on the bulb on the plate. They don't eat. They just stare. You move toward a nearby bench and overhear a quiet conversation between a brewer and a man who might be a notary or a poet. It's hard to tell anymore. they're trying to trade a bulb for an actual bag of rye. The baker declined. He's moved on to onions. Fringe tidbit. There were reports of people trying to sell bulbs back to the growers, only to find the growers had already sold the same bulb 3 times and had no idea where it physically was anymore. You leave the tavern. Out in the square, the colours feel washed out. There are fewer flowers in windows, fewer posters. The chalkboards that once shouted Gouda's flame in big loops now say things like discount peonies or hot soup no questions. Historians still debate whether there were clear signs of the collapse before it happened. Some say yes, the sudden surge in short-term resales, the lack of physical bulbs, the increasingly odd trades. Others argue that no one could see the end, because they were all too busy watching the line go up. You pass a townhouse where a man is frantically measuring bulbs with calipers. They've shrunk, he hisses to no one in particular. They're smaller this year, aren't they? You don't answer. Inside a candle-lit room across the street, a family is eating quietly. No contracts, no whispers, just you. They're the ones who didn't invest, the ones who thought it smelled funny from the beginning. They glance out the window and lock eyes with you. Their expressions say, "We stayed poor, but we stayed sane." Fringe tidbit. A few towns began holding informal bulb confession circles, where people sat in a circle and admitted how much they'd spent on tulips, then quietly drank mulled wine and agreed never to speak of it again. The cold is sharper now. It bites your fingers, and the laughter that once floated like chimney smoke is gone. In its place, nervous arithmetic. People whispering about delivery dates and dried bulbs and who's still willing to buy. You cross a canal bridge and look down at the ice. Someone's dropped a bouquet of paper tulips onto the frozen surface. They lie there, slowly soaking, ink bleeding outward like regret. Because this is the tipping point. The petals still exist, but the magic is thinning. And for the first time, people are starting to notice that you can't pay rent with potential. You hear him before you see him. A stout man with red cheeks, boots slick with slush, and a voice that would rather shout than speak. He's marching up and down the main square, clutching a folded parchment like it's a royal decree, and bellowing, "Have bought the Admiral of Admiration." Nobody applauds. Mainstream fact Admiral of Admiration was one of many real tulip varieties circulating during tulip mania. Its rarity and flamboyant name made it one of the more sought-after bulbs in the frenzy, often fetching outrageously high sums. The man waves his contract like a sword. He's beaming, glowing, proud enough to burst. You sidestep a puddle and follow as he announces to the bakery, the apothecary, and a wagon full of confused chickens that he traded his cheese shop for a single bulb of the Admiral. The bakery doors stay closed. The chickens remain unimpressed. You ask what the Admiral looks like. Crimson with gold flames and a tip like a candle wick, he says with absolute certainty. She'll bloom in March, and then I'll be richer than the Butter Guild. You nod slowly. His nose is running. Fringe tidbit cheese merchants in Harlem were among the most frequently mocked in satirical pamphlets during tulip mania, often depicted as gullible, greedy, or utterly convinced that Gouda and bulbs were interchangeable currencies. He's pacing now, rehearsing how he'll decorate his new manor, which doesn't exist yet. He plans to commission a tulip-shaped chandelier, hire an architect who understands floral angles, name his children after petals. You glance at his shoes. They're cracked, and he's missing one glove. Historians still argue whether the stories of merchants selling shops for bulbs are exaggerated. but transaction records do show that bulbs like the Admiral of Admiration sold for the modern equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes more. And all this for a flower that, in most cases, would bloom for a week. You leave the cheese man to his delusions and duck into the Weaver's Alley, where a group of neighbours is having a quieter, tighter conversation. He did what? Sold the press, the whole shop. For a bulb? It hasn't even surfaced yet. Lord, preserve us. They fall silent as you pass. You don't blame them. The tension now is sticky. You can feel it clinging to doorways, leaking through chimney smoke. The man who bought a dream is walking like a prince, but behind him, the town is tensing. Fringe tidbit. Some towns held secret votes to decide whether to pretend a tulip market crash hadn't happened just to avoid social chaos. Others quietly agreed to forget certain deals, like collective historical amnesia applied with a broom. You catch up to the Admiral's new owner near the fish stand. He's trying to pay for smoked herring with a copy of his contract. The vendor leans over the counter and says very gently, "Paper doesn't taste like fish." The man blinks, then folds the parchment, tucks it into his coat, and walks away with pride still intact if slightly dented. Because the beauty of the dream hasn't cracked yet. But you can hear it creaking, like a roof beam groaning under fresh snow. The bulb isn't even out of the ground, and it's already the centre of his universe. But the market is wobbling. There are whispers now, of buyers who won't answer doors, of tulips that don't look like they're sketches, of contracts scribbled too hastily for too much by too many. You pass a shop window where someone has written in chalk no bulbs, no trades, just bread. It's oddly comforting. You stand there a moment longer, watching your breath fog the glass. And in the reflection, you see a man holding a tulip dream too tightly, walking into a world that's already changed. You're back in the tavern, the one with the warped floorboards and the goat painting that never looks quite the same twice. But the mood tonight, it's not buzzing, it's buzzed. The air is thick, not with excitement, but with that slow, sagging weight of too much hope gone quiet. A woman in a velvet bonnet sits in the corner, holding a folded paper contract like it's a love letter that stopped making sense. She doesn't open it. She just stares. Because today was supposed to be the big auction, a gathering of Harlem's most flower-mad citizens, eager to outbid one another on bulbs they'd never seen, names they could barely pronounce, and dreams that had already been carved into daydreams and debt. Mainstream fact. In February 1637, during what was expected to be a major tulip auction in Harlem, no one showed up to buy. The bids fell silent. Prices plummeted. It marked the abrupt collapse of the speculative tulip market and triggered what historians now consider the bursting of the first recorded economic bubble. You take a seat on a bench still warm from someone who gave up. A man beside you has removed his hat and placed it carefully on the table, as if that will soften what's coming. No one bid, he mutters, not a single offer. You glance around. Half the tavern is full of paper contracts, sketches, crumpled promissory notes. Some of them line the floor like dried leaves. Others are burned at the edges, tucked behind candle holders, shoved under plates like coasters that remember better times. Fringe tidbit after the Harlem auction collapsed. People scrambled to renegotiate or void their contracts, pleading illness, confusion, or simply pretending they'd never agreed to anything. One man claimed he thought Admiral Van Horn was a cheese, and his contract was a very elaborate grocery list. A merchant near the bar tries to trade a General Van Enkhuizen for a half pint of beer. The barkeep squints at him. "You got anything real?" The merchant says nothing, just folds his paper and tucks it in his sleeve like a secret that no longer wants to be told. You walk outside. It's snowing softly now, big, quiet flakes that don't want to land, just hover. You pass a flower stand that's closed, the painted sign covered in cloth. This stand used to sell portraits of bulbs, etched in ink, coloured by hand. Now there's nothing, just a crate full of actual bulbs, small, dusty, onion-like things with frayed roots and no glory. One rolls onto the street. No one stops to pick it up. You find the baker again, the one who sold his oven for the eternal fire of Holland. He's sitting on a bench, coat buttoned wrong, staring at a bulb in his lap like it owes him an apology. "Still think it'll bloom, you ask?" He doesn't look up, just whispers, "It better." Historians still argue how devastating the collapse truly was. Some say it ruined lives and drained entire savings. Others suggest the damage was more contained, affecting a few overly ambitious traders, while the rest of society looked on, mildly embarrassed. Fringe tidbit in at least one town. After the market fell apart, someone organised a bulb ball, a mock celebration where everyone wore paper flowers and pretended nothing had happened. No one laughed, but everyone danced. You pause near the canal. The water reflects the dim yellow lights of a city returning to normal. The fever has broken, but the chill remains. Behind you, someone tears a contract in half. Another person tries to sell a bulb for soup, and for the first time in months, the streets are quiet. No shouting about admirals, no bidding wars, just snow and bulbs, and a silence that says the bloom has faded. And all that's left is the dirt. It's the next morning, and the sky is trying its best to look innocent. You trudge along the canal path past empty market stalls, wet paper scraps clinging to your boots. The wind is soft, but it carries the scent of something broken, not like fire or ruin, but like parchment soaked in regret. At the edge of the square, the tulip man is packing up his crates. Not selling. Returning. Mainstream fact. After the tulip market collapsed, efforts were made to return bulbs or annul contracts, but confusion reigned. Many buyers disappeared, sellers refused refunds, and entire neighbourhoods quietly buried their losses, sometimes literally, by planting the bulbs just to avoid looking at them. You walk past a shop that used to sell tulip illustrations for a few silver coins apiece. The windows are dark now. Someone has written "No more blooms" in the condensation with a shaky finger. Inside, a boy is tearing the pages from a tulip ledger and using them to feed a weak fire. Fringe tidbit. There were reports of children playing tulip auction games in the aftermath, pretending to outbid each other for broken flowers. One rule: you had to shout "Fool's bloom" before the game ended, or you weren't allowed to pretend again for a week. You stop at the corner bakery, the one that was once gone to buy a tulip. The doors open again. Inside, the smell of rye and ash. The baker sees you. "Bread," he says simply. You buy a loaf. No talk of bulbs, no fire-coloured petals, no admiral of anything. Just bread. Historians still debate how the tulip crash affected the broader Dutch economy. Some claim the impact was minimal, confined to a few foolish traders. Others argue it left behind a cultural scar, one that made people suspicious of speculation, paper promises, and expensive plants. You pass a wall where someone has chalked a tulip bloom, crossed it out, and written underneath "Back to onions." A child nearby is humming a tune about Admiral Van Regret. You smile, just a little. You turn onto a quieter street, the kind where people nod but don't speak. You can feel the shift here, fewer silk sleeves, fewer scrolls. People carry fish, firewood, not contracts. A man sweeping his stoop looks up. Cold one today. You nod. He squints. You didn't lose too much, did you? You shake your head, only faith in human priorities. He grins. Ah, that grows back. Fringe tidbit. Some communities held mock trials for tulip bulbs. A man would dress as a judge, others as witnesses, and they'd put the bulb on trial for fraud. Verdicts included sentence to soup and planted with prejudice. You pause by a canal and watch as a boat passes, low and quiet. It carries barrels of salted fish, bundles of rope, a single jug of wine and not a single tulip. Normal cargo. Honest cargo? You breathe. It feels different. Lighter. Less floral. Behind you, a cart clatters by. A farmer waves from the seat. No flowers today, he shouts, just carrots. You wave back. And just like that, the spell is broken. The petals that once whispered promises of wealth and wonder are now just plants. The bulbs will still bloom, but only as flowers. Not fortunes. Not futures. Just a bit of colour in spring, with no price tag. No contract. No crowd. You're sitting on a bench made slick with morning dew, watching two pigeons argue over a breadcrumb and thinking about how ridiculous it all was. A flower. A flower. You chuckle softly to yourself, not because it's funny, well, okay, a little because it's funny, but mostly because it feels like waking up from a dream where everyone was wearing powdered wigs and screaming the word Admiral at vegetables. Mainstream fact. After the tulip crash, satire flourished. Pamphlets, songs, and crude woodcut prints circulated throughout the Netherlands, mocking those who lost fortunes. The tulip craze became shorthand for foolishness. A cautionary tale passed from pub to pulpit to grandmother's lap. Across the square, a group of workers is replanting bulbs in a public garden. Nothing fancy now, just red and yellow ones, the kind no one names after dukes or war heroes, just tulips. A child watches them plant. No bidding war, no applause. Just a small hand in the dirt pressing down a bulb. Fringe Tidbit 1 satirical pamphlet titled The Tulip Fool depicted a man literally turning into a flower, roots bursting from his shoes, petals blooming from his hat. The caption read, "He watered his wallet and the rain came anyway." You wander through a side street and spot an old man pulling parchment from his fireplace. He's not reading them, just feeding the flames. You peer at the top of one contract for 2 bulbs of the painted Admiral and 1/2 of Viceroy. He catches your eye and shrugs. Winter's not over yet. You nod and keep walking. Historians still argue whether the Dutch truly learned a lesson from the tulip bubble. Some say it curbed speculation for a time. Others point out that, soon enough, the country was back to trading sugar, spices, and beaver pelts with alarming enthusiasm. You pass a woman selling simple tulip sketches 5 guilders apiece. You stop. You ask if they're real. She grins, as real as you want them to be. You buy one anyway. Not for profit. Just because it's pretty. Fringe tidbit a rumour surfaced in the 1640s that one of the Semper Augustus bulbs had been ground into powder and used as face rouge by a merchant's wife. The merchant was never heard from again. By mid-morning, the fog lifts, and in its place, life. No more breathless bets. No more velvet-cloaked fortune hunters with paper gardens. Just markets selling apples and onions again. You pass a window where a bulb sits in a cup of water. No name, no tag, no frame. Just waiting to bloom. You smile, because the madness is gone. But the flower remains. It never asked to be a symbol. Never wanted to be a currency. It was just a bloom, caught in the crossfire of imagination and greed. And now, it gets to be a flower again. The canal path is dry now, the frost receding like a tide of old worries, and the town feels like it's learning to speak in a quieter voice. You walk past shuttered stalls and open gardens. No one is shouting tulip names anymore. No one is drawing contracts in the corners of taverns. Instead, you hear sweeping, real brooms, real porches, real people. You breathe in, and it smells like bread, wet brick, and last year's dreams being gently composted. Mainstream fact. After the tulip crash, the Dutch flower trade didn't disappear, it stabilised. Tulips continued to be cultivated and sold, but the frenzied speculation vanished. They became beautiful again, ornamental, what they were always meant to be. You walk past the home of the merchant who once wore 6 rings and whispered about Admiral Van something. His windows are bare now. His porch has a pot of hyacinths. No sign, no audience, just a pot, just a flower. Fringe tidbit. Some families quietly buried their bulb contracts in their gardens as a sort of symbolic surrender paper turning back to earth, like admitting they'd planted hope in the wrong place. A boy jogs past you, clutching a bulb in one hand and a loaf of rye in the other. His mother calls from a window. Don't trade it this time. He laughs and keeps running. You grin, because that's the thing people remember. They joke now. They nudge each other gently with, "Remember when you sold your boots for that purple tulip that turned out to be a beet sort of energy?" And somehow, that remembering makes everything feel safer. The flowers are blooming again, small ones, plain ones. The kind that cost a day's wage if you're feeling generous. The kind that show up because they want to, not because someone promised you a manor and a goose. Historians still debate how much emotional fallout lingered in Dutch society. Some say the humiliation was quickly laughed off. Others believe the shock of financial collapse hung over the culture like a fog for decades, quietly shaping the Dutch attitude toward money, debt, and spectacle. You stop by a wooden bench overlooking the canal. An older woman is knitting beside a basket of yellow bulbs. You ask her what they're called. She shrugs. They're just tulips. No titles. No boasts. Just roots and patience. Fringe tidbit, a tavern in Leiden reportedly renamed itself the Sober Bloom after the crash and offered free bread to anyone who swore off floral investment. The owner kept a flattened tulip bulb under glass behind the bar. You sit for a while, listening to the wind ruffle the water. In a nearby courtyard, 2 kids are playing a game with petals pulling them off one by one, guessing names like General Muffin and the Toasted Flame of Friesland. They're making them up, of course. But no one's writing contracts. No one's offering goats. And that makes all the difference. Because the petals still fall, the roots still grow, but the fever has finally broken. You're walking the winding path beside the Haarlem archives now, and the smell of ink and dust creeps out through the shutters. A stack of old ledgers sits in the windowsill, sun-bleached and sleepy. If you flip one open, you'll find names Admiral Leifkens, Semper Augustus, Viceroy, Café au lait. But today, the ink seems less sharp, less urgent, more like a fading whisper than a shout. Mainstream fact. After the mania ended, Dutch historians and pamphleteers began collecting records, contracts, and anecdotes from the tulip frenzy. These early documents formed the basis of what would become one of the most cited speculative bubbles in financial history, the cautionary tale that never dies. Inside, the archivist shows you a wooden drawer full of bulb contracts, each folded like a love letter written in a dream. Most are unsigned. Some are stained with candle wax. One smells like onions. These, he says softly, are what remain of a very short century. You blink. A short what? He smiles. A century of thought that lasted about 6 months. Fringe tidbit. Some of the tulip contracts were so elaborate they included not only the buyer, seller, and bulb name, but poetic descriptions of imagined blooms, delivery instructions for spring, and even ceremonial language like, "for the glory of the garden." You sit in the reading room while sunlight slants through warped glass. On one page, someone scribbled a marginal note. It bloomed, but I never saw it. You wonder if they meant the flower or the wealth. Outside, life has completely returned to its non-floral rhythm. You hear hammering, someone fixing a roof, a fisherman calling down to a boy with a bucket, a woman sweeping her stoop and humming something about goats and admirals in a minor key. You head back toward the Tavern Street, now oddly cheerful. The pub once known as the Honest Tulip now bears a fresh sign, the Broken Petal. Beneath it, the tagline, "Bread before bulbs." You step inside. It's warm again, familiar. But this time, the talk isn't about flowers. It's about harvest dates, boat schedules, and a recent card game scandal involving a bishop, 2 sailors, and a rather smug goat. Historians still argue why the tulip story became such an enduring parable. Was it the absurdity, the speed, the fact that people dared to dream so big about something so delicate? Or maybe it's because it revealed a truth too honest to ignore. Value is a story we agree to believe in, and sometimes we forget who started telling it. Fringe tidbit. In the years following the crash, Amsterdam published several illustrated children's books warning against flower folly. One of them featured a villainous tulip that lured children into debt and turned their parents into windmills. You smile at the image. Then you glance across the room and spot a single tulip in a jar on the bar. It's just red. No stripes. No title. A flower. That's it. And no one's bidding on it. They're just admiring it quietly, fully, without expectation. You sip your drink and watch the flame of the tulip dance a little in the breeze from the door. This is how it begins again. Not with greed, with gratitude. For the simple, miraculous fact that a flower blooms at all. A cart creaks past you loaded with muddy root vegetables and smelling of honesty. The driver hums a tune with no lyrics. Just the kind of melody that fits a world slowly sewing itself back together. You follow the path to the old greenhouse, the one that used to guard its tulips like royal jewels. Its glass panes are cleaner now, less fogged by ambition. Inside, the rows of blooms are modest, nothing striped, nothing gold-edged, just pinks, yellows, a few hopeful purples. And not a price tag in sight. Mainstream fact after the crash, the Netherlands did not abandon tulip cultivation. In fact, It refined and professionalised the trade. Tulips became the pride of Dutch horticulture not as speculation, but as artistry. Haarlem remained a centre for bulb growing, eventually leading to the globally admired Dutch flower industry we know today. You peer inside and see an elderly gardener with a trowel in one hand and a smudge of soil on his cheek. He doesn't glance up. He's humming something that sounds like the wind moving through a garden. You lean against the frame of the door and watch. No charts, no contracts, just the slow and sacred act of planting. Fringe tidbit. Some families who lost everything during tulip mania kept growing tulips, not for profit but out of a quiet sense of ritual. One widow was said to plant a single bulb each year on her husband's grave, whispering still beautiful, even now. You walk among the beds, hands behind your back, like someone pacing through forgiveness. A young girl waves at you from between two rows of blooms. "These ones are moon kisses," she says. "I named them." You smile. Good name. They cost one smile and one song. You laugh her and she takes that as payment. Historians still debate whether the emotional recovery was as quick as the economic one. Was trust in markets rebuilt overnight, or did it take years, generations, even for people to believe in value again? What's certain is that beauty never stopped blooming. You kneel beside a row of young plants. The bulbs are barely peeking above the soil, but already you can sense the shape of spring to come. Fringe tidbit. A small gardening journal in Utrecht began publishing tulip poetry in the 1640s. Every issue featured a bulb sonnet. Some were anonymous, some were bad. All of them were tender. You leave the greenhouse and step into a sun that finally feels sincere. The city is alive again, not with frenzy, but with rhythm. Shutters clatter. Shoes tap. A broom brushes gently at the steps of the notary's office, where, months ago, men once fought over the price of the flame-lipped Duke of Haarlem. Today, that same notary is sketching a dandelion in the margin of his ledger. You pass him. He nods. No more admirals, just a flower. And that's the truth that lingers now, like the last streak of pink in a spring dusk. The flower was never at fault. The petals never promised anything. It was always us. We were the ones who whispered fortunes into petals, who built towers on stems, who mistook bloom for guarantee. And now, with the frenzy faded, the tulips are free again. Free to grow, to fade, to return, and be admired, not auctioned. You wander through a quiet lane flanked by brick houses with window boxes now blooming with modest tulips. No golden names, no legends etched on scrolls, just flowers, simple, earnest, perfectly ordinary flowers. And yet, as the wind lifts the petals just slightly, you feel something ghost-like trailing in their wake. Not sinister, just remembered. Like an old rumour that never completely stops humming. Because the story of the tulip didn't vanish. It echoed. Mainstream fact. Though the Dutch tulip craze ended in the 1630s, its legacy lived on not just in economics textbooks, but in cultural consciousness. The term tulip mania became shorthand for irrational markets and speculative bubbles. It was referenced in literature, sermons, political satire, and centuries later, on the stock floor. You pass a group of students well. Apprentice scribes may be debating something on the steps of the city school. One is waving a thin book in the air, shouting. It was never about the tulips, it was about trust. The others groan. One says, "You can't eat trust." Fringe tidbit. In the 18th century, French salons hosted tulip parlour games where guests would invent the most ridiculous flower names and try to sell them to one another using fake guilders. The winner received a real tulip, usually red, usually very unimpressed by the game. You walk on... Someone behind you hums a tune with lyrics you almost recognise. Buy a bloom and build a house. Paint the petals. Feed your spouse. It trails off. You pass a merchant painting over the old sign on his storefront. The bottom layer says Bulb Emporium. The new layer Wool and Wood Goods. You catch a faint glimpse of the word Viceroy still visible beneath the paint. He catches you looking. Let the flower go, he says with a wink. I'm trying, you reply. Historians still argue over whether tulip mania should be considered a genuine financial bubble or simply a social curiosity inflated by satire. Some economists suggest it didn't cause widespread ruin. Others claim it marked the first crack in the trust between markets and the people who want magic from them. You stop at a library window where a display case shows two documents. One is a bulb contract from 1637. The other is a cryptocurrency advertisement from last year. The caption some blooms never change. You laugh, because the point was never just about tulips. It was about the human habit of dreaming big and leaping blindly. Fringe tidbit, a German philosopher in the 1700s, wrote a whole treatise titled On the Delicate Madness of Floral Ambition, where he claimed the tulip craze was evidence that humanity would never stop trying to trap eternity in a vase. You stand at a canal now, leaning on a rail that didn't exist during the frenzy. Below, the water flows calmly. A boat passes plain, low, slow. The only cargo a crate of soil and a sleeping cat. You smile. Because the world didn't end when the tulips stopped being expensive. It kept turning. It kept planting. And quietly, it learned that some petals fade. But the stories grow legs. They cross borders. They get retold with bigger numbers, brighter blooms, and new villains. And eventually, they come back wearing a new flower's name. The cobblestones beneath your feet are warm now, finally warmed by spring, not speculation. Birds trill from the rooftops like they've always known something we didn't. The tulips in windows don't bother performing anymore. They just exist, bloom, fade, return, quietly, defiantly ordinary. But you're still haunted by the question, was it really that bad? Mainstream fact. Even today, economists, historians, and philosophers continue to debate the scale, impact, and meaning of tulip mania. Was it a financial disaster, or just a niche mishap with dramatic storytelling? Was it a true economic bubble or a 17th century media exaggeration? You sit on the low stone wall outside the notary's office. A group of elders shuffle past, one chuckling about his cousin who once sold an entire brewery to buy a tulip named Duke of something or other. Another replies, well, at least he got the beer first. Laughter. It sounds more like therapy than mockery. Fringe tidbit. In the 19th century, Dutch newspapers revisited the tulip craze with a tone of mild embarrassment and historical pride, treating it as both a national cautionary tale and an odd badge of honour. We made flowers too powerful. Then we stopped. Kind of. You glance across the canal, where a painter is working on a mural not of tulips, but of the contracts. He sketched them like leaves crumpled, blowing across a field. No names, no numbers, just fluttering ghosts of what might have been. It's weirdly moving. Because the real damage wasn't just the money, it was what people believed the money meant. A bulb wasn't just a flower, it was a future, a house, a name. And when it didn't bloom, it wasn't the soil that cracked, it was the story. Historians still argue whether anyone was truly ruined. Some say the records were exaggerated by pamphlet sellers and bitter poets. Others believe shame simply wiped the ledgers clean. You can't audit embarrassment. Fringe tidbit, a British economist in the 1920s, tried to recreate the tulip bubble using daffodils and fake currency. It ended when participants began hoarding the paper coins and refusing to trade. The experiment ended with a fistfight over a wilted narcissus. You stand, stretch, and walk back toward the marketplace. It's busy again, but different. The stalls sell things that can be eaten, worn, held. Even the flower stand only carries small bundles, wrapped in string, sold by weight, not by lineage. And then you see it. A tulip standing in a crate of 10 others, plain white with a faint pink blush. The seller catches your eye. No titles, she says, just tulips. You nod. It's all they ever were, and yet somehow also everything. Because if this story proves anything, it's that we don't just want beauty, we want to own it, predict it, profit from it. But beauty doesn't like rules, and neither do flowers. And now the sun begins to slide down the sides of the houses like syrup, slow and amber and full of silence. The canal is still, holding reflections like memories, and the last flicker of the day settles on a garden. You step inside one final time. No gate, no fanfare, just rows of tulips swaying in the soft breeze, glowing like low lanterns lit for no one in particular. No signs, no prices, no admirals, just flowers. Mainstream fact. In the decades that followed tulip mania, the Netherlands became home to one of the most respected and stable horticultural economies in the world. The disaster gave way to structure, regulation, and pride not in prices, but in petals. You walk slowly between the rows. They're not flawless. One is half bloomed. Another has a bite taken out of it, probably a rabbit. But each one is real, rooted, present. No contract promises, just truth in soil. Fringe tidbit. In the mid-1600s, a Haarlem schoolteacher began requiring his students to grow tulips as a lesson in humility. The flower, he wrote, does not ask your opinion. It simply grows, or it does not. You sit on a bench at the far end of the garden. No one's here, and yet you feel accompanied by every whisper, every sketch, every merchant who once believed in a bloom that could buy a castle, and every quiet soul who just wanted to see one open. Historians still debate what truly collapsed in 1637. Was it the market, or just belief? Fringe tidbit, a letter from a Haarlem weaver, found centuries later, ends with this: it did not bloom that year, but neither did I, and now we both begin again. The bell tower rings once in the distance, not to warn, just to mark. The breeze picks up, the tulips shift, and in their movement there is no fear, no greed, just the rhythm of life returning to itself, not as a warning, as a welcome. And now let it all grow quiet around you. The blooms, the names, the deals struck with trembling hands under flickering candlelight, let them fold like petals at dusk, closing not from shame, but from rest. Let your breath follow the rhythm of a garden at peace. Not striving, not selling, just being. You've wandered through the strange world of a flower that wore too many costumes, that was asked to be more than it ever meant to be. You've seen people dream with reckless beauty and fall with equally beautiful grace, and in the end, you've found something softer than fortune. You've found the bloom that doesn't need to be renamed, the bulb that opens in its own time, the soil that forgives. Outside your window, somewhere in the dark, something small is growing, not for fame, not for gold, just for the sky. Let that be enough. Let your thoughts unfurl like tulip leaves, slow and green and sure. Let the stories fall away and the silence rise. There is no bidding now, no admiral to impress, only you, and a garden that never asked you to prove anything. Rest here. Feel the weight leave your chest, like the final page of a tale you didn't know you needed. The flower is asleep. The paper is ash. The past is soft. And the night is yours.